Well, the next speaker is Marvin Minsky. I'm not going to make a formal introduction because probably he wants to speak himself. I met him the first time when I was applying to MIT, and Ed Fredkin said, well, let's see whether Marvin has anything good to say about you after seeing you. And then, we spent many years together at, well, I was not in the AI lab, I was in the lab for computer science. So he's been a column of so many things that there is no point in listing them all. I can make a remark that somebody just reminded to me that Eric Drexler, who was a student of Marvin Minsky, is a close collaborator of the next speaker. So there are all of these connections between one person and another. Marvin got the Japan Prize, is that correct?
Sure.
Yes. But he got so many because, anyway, I don't have to introduce him. I asked him for the title of this talk, and he said, well, the title is not ready yet. Probably will coalesce at the end of the talk. The provisional title is What's Wrong with People? So, Marvin, we'll have questions and answers after the two talks. So we'll have about 35 to 40 minutes for each talk, and then questions and answers, and then there will be lunch normally at 12:45. Probably everything has slipped about 10 minutes. Marvin, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me? How can I? Silly question.
Speak close to the microphone. So they instructed me, because otherwise, I don't know, for some reason, the people far away cannot hear you unless you speak close to the microphone. It's a mystery to me. But
it's an interesting relationship. But they could move up if they wanted, so it doesn't matter.
That would be, a good form of sociality.
I'm going to talk about what's wrong, and because one of the advantages of the future is it doesn't have to be the same as the present, but it probably will be for a few 100 million years. What's the current estimate on how long the Earth will last? When I was a kid, they thought it was good for 7 billion years, but now they know that the sun will become a red giant in about 3 billion years, and that's a little shorter. But then there's something else, and I forget what it is, that happens in less than 1 billion. So we have to hurry. And the reason you laugh is that you don't really give a damn because you're going to be dead. And so I forgot to put that on the list of problems we have to solve, but a certain part of this talk will be about what to do about death. My slogan is, there's nothing certain but taxes. So here's a list of serious problems. I just dashed these off. I might have missed some really important ones. And there seem to be 8 of those. The first 7 are all because population is too large. Well, that's going too far. As everybody knows, since the dawn of international travel, the danger of serious epidemics has gotten worse, or at least many people think it's worse. There used to be mutated viruses and bacteria, and they would wipe out a village, and nobody ever heard about that because they weren't particularly attached to anyone else, and so forth. And but now if you get a new virus, it gets on a jet plane and it spreads around the world. And you see, viruses have a fair chance of dying out if there's only a few micrograms of them. But once you get a major epidemic, then you've got kilograms of the stuff, or moles, or whatever. Nobody has a mole of virus because one forgets how big a virus is. And then the chance of it getting worse gets larger. So that's a problem of population. I just put on that first line the fact that some public health person told me that something like 30% of infectious diseases are spread by handshaking and other forms of unnecessary personal contact. So by simply refusing to shake hands, you could save more money than the entire Homeland Security program ever imagined. And again, if you say things like that, everyone laughs. Asia doesn't shake hands, as far as I know. Okay, so the big problem I'm going to talk about is that we're not smart enough, but there's a bunch of other little things like pollution and energy shortage and disappearance of biodiversity and wealth distribution. And the solution to those is that there are just too many people. In the old days, when there was a few million people, then if you had something you didn't care about, you could throw it out and some animal would eat it, or you could throw it in the river or the ocean and nobody cared. And if we had a couple of 100 million people, that wouldn't be a problem. Also, if we had a couple of 100 million people instead of 6 billion, then the fossil fuels would last for a few more centuries. And actually, the coal will last quite a lot, even with the 6 billion people, but it's believed to be bad for us. Then another thing we have to deal with in the future are the catastrophes like the big meteors that come around every 50 million years or whatever. And if we want to live out our 300 million years or whatever we have for this planet before we go out into the universe, we're going to have to do something about those bad asteroids. If there's a supernova in the neighborhood, then we're cooked, but no, that doesn't happen very often. So I'll skip some of that. So how many people should there be? I don't know. When I was thinking about this, I remembered the last time I talked to Werner von Braun, we were talking about how many people would you need in a spaceship in case you were thinking about moving human civilization to another star or something. And I thought you'd need about 400 specialists, and he thought you'd need about 10,000 people to get enough variety, and he's probably right. But the space program isn't, it's now worried about how to send 4 people to Mars. I was at a serious NASA discussion of that mission, and part of it was about how much medicine you could take, because you would want to take all possible drugs. And it seemed to me that that was a job for nanotechnology or something, and what you should take is a little machine that can make any drug. And maybe NASA had enough money to produce that in the next 20 years. And then a large part of the discussion was, well, somebody's going to die if you're going to go on this terrible mission for 3 or 4 years or whatever it was. And would the Earthmen insist that you bring the body back, or could you just chuck it into space? And this conference never really got around to anything important. Okay, how do we reduce population? The simplest thing would be to make people 6 inches instead of 6 feet, because that gives you a factor of almost 2,000. So if you could pull that off, you could get 1 trillion people on the planet with less pollution. Of course, they'd radiate more heat because of their larger surface, so that probably isn't quite right. I don't think that's feasible. You can make 6-inch cats, and as far as I know, they're just about as bright as foot-long cats, but that's really very small change. And I understand that the neurons in all mammals are about the same size. Is that right? If you have a tiny little animal, are its neurons just as big? Anyone know? What?
Whales have very
They have big brains. Are all the neurons big too? Well, anyway, I doubt if you could make them 10 times smaller, but that would be a good job for the geneticists. Maybe neurons are just full of stuff they don't need, and you could simplify them. However, if you can reproduce people's minds in computers, then I'm sure that I have a feeling that the total amount of human memory is about the order of what you can store on a CD. And there's no evidence that people have more than 100 megabytes of knowledge. Nobody knows, and nobody knows how to figure it out. But we have 50 trillion synapses, and I suspect that you use 1 million of them for every bit that you can really rely on. Anyway, it's interesting when you think about such things that you realize, in spite of the fact that neuroscience is doubling every few months, we still don't know how memory works in any high-level sense. Second proposal, I think I'm going to rush through these slides because I look at each line and I see what's wrong with it, and it takes too long. But a lot of people think that there's an instinct to have children, and there better be, actually. Nobody would have a baby if they realized they'd have to sit home and feed it for 3 or 7 years. But when we understand what's in the genome, or in each person's genome, you could have 46 people. I think a fairly simple form of genetic surgery would be to decide which, instead of implanting a whole nucleus, you ought to be able to implant carefully selected chromosomes. So you could have 46 people, each altogether have 15 or 20 children. And then everybody would have lots of relatives and a big family, and yet you would be producing one person for every 2 in the previous generation. So there's a kind and socially acceptable way to get the population down without actually sterilizing most people. So when you get your genome sequenced, you can decide which of your 46 chromosomes you like best. Right now, you select by, never mind. The theme of the long talk I was going to give is that we have all sorts of problems, and it seems quite clear to me that we're just dressed up chimpanzees and we're not smart enough to solve these problems on the whole. So it seems to me that it takes about 100 years to learn biology right now, so nobody knows it. It probably takes 50 years to learn physics, if you include solid-state physics and all the complicated things. So I think our first priority in genetic engineering should be to make people live at least 2 or 3 times as long, just because if they don't, they won't be able to solve the next generation of problems. So we have to bootstrap ourselves into this. The other thing is to make ourselves smarter, and nobody knows much about that. And it's probably politically incorrect to do so. I have a nice story about this. I did give a talk once when I was looking at longevity, and I had a big audience. And I said, how many of you would like to live 500 years? Or maybe it was just 200 years. And nobody raised their hand. So I asked them why later, and they said, well, it would be boring. So I tried to get them to accept the assumption that they wouldn't be totally crippled by arthritis and things like that. But generally, most of these people, which was in an audience assembled by Philip Morris as a result of some sort of contest and had no scientists in it, none of them liked the idea of living very long. And I realized that the world is a terribly dangerous place, because all those people around you, except in the university or except in science, because I did the same thing with a bunch of scientists, and they all None of them said it would be boring. Practically all of them said, I have problems that would take hundreds of years maybe, and I'd like the chance to work on it. So, but that's a very small minority. So these are the big problems, that we're not smart enough and we don't live long enough. That's two problems. So we could try to make small people, but I don't think it would work. It's a nice question. The M fell off, miniaturized. Isn't that a nice word? So I think the answer is we have to figure out how our minds work and put them in little computers or big computers, and that has a lot of advantages. Like you could live forever if you want, because you can always replace parts. I have this backup thing with 256 megabytes of memory here, just in case something goes wrong with the computer. I could plug it into someone else's Mac. And we could make enhancements. And one of the early things I think we'll be able to do in the next 10 or 20 years is innocuously put a few hundred or thousand electrodes into selected parts of somebody's brain and attach it to huge databases and figure out how memory is coded and so forth. And so there are all sorts of wonderful enhancements we're going to get just by fairly simple biotechnology. These people could communicate better, assuming that you can translate between one private mental language and another. And international travel could then be banned because you could just email yourself to the place you wanted to visit without bringing any viruses. I put disease-free, but that's wrong. I think if you made smart machines, the first 1,000 of them would be wildly insane. There's no way to debug it. To me, almost every normal human is insane because a very large percentage of the people on Earth, for example, are infested by systems of memes called religions, which are systems of ideas that say it's really good to believe things without evidence. And it's a kind of virtue, like how long can you hold your breath? I don't know who would if people still have contests. In high school, they had breath-holding contests. So now I'm just going to change the topic and say, why don't we have artificial intelligence? And so far, in my view, what happened is that there was a lot of progress in making machines that could understand things in particular domains and solve pretty hard problems as long as you were in a specialized area. And this petered out around 1980 because none of those programs could solve problems that, except in little pockets of mathematics maybe, that people considered really hard. And so today, when you have a hard problem, you don't think of asking a computer. And I think the reason for that is that the AI community sort of it flatlined, it went brain dead. People had worked on these elaborate heuristic programs and clever ways to search spaces of possibilities, but it was getting hard, and it became clear in the 1970s that you couldn't, for example, build a machine that would understand a first-grade children's story unless it knew what the words mean. And instead of working on what words mean, people said, well, maybe we can make a machine that will learn what words mean. And you got these neural networks, which were supposed to be self-organizing, and people would make dynamic systems, which were supposed to have limit cycles and attractors and things. And a great deal of time and money went into a half a dozen different ideas of how to make a machine that would get smart by itself. Genetic programming became very popular, and once in a while, a genetic program, which is a little simulated evolution, solves a problem like making some computer circuit with one less component, and so forth. But none of them have done anything smart. You might have heard that there was such a system that solved the traveling salesman problem, which is a hard mathematical problem. In fact, it didn't do better than people, and in the 15 years since then, even though that made a big splash, you haven't heard any news of it making progress in that or similar problems. Are my 15 minutes up?
No.
Here are some reasons why computers don't really think, and lots of people think it's impossible. For example, there's a whole industry now called consciousness studies, where people are trying to find what magic part of the brain makes us conscious. And those people are pretty serious and rather influential. And skip that. And you probably can't read this, but as far as I can see, there isn't anything called consciousness. But there are these 12 or 16 different things that the mind does, each of which is pretty complicated, like remembering what you've recently done. Because if I asked you, were you conscious of scratching your ear, you would say yes, but you could only say yes if you remembered it doing that. Or if you said no, that would mean you didn't remember it. That's one of these 16 different phenomena. In other words, the word consciousness is not a mystery because there's a single magical principle or phenomenon. What it is that there are, describing yourself as an entity. That's called having a model of mind or something. Some people say that's the touchstone. And you hear, well, the chimpanzee that looks in the mirror and sees a red spot on its forehead is conscious because it has a model of mind. Well, that would be easy to put in a machine, and it wouldn't be terribly exciting unless the model of mind were any good. Envisioning different possibilities, explicitly formulating plans, and in other words, the word consciousness means all of those things, and each of those probably involves a highly evolved piece of machinery in your brain. The brain has about 400 rather specialized centers, and that's why I think this idea of looking for the big kill or the great new idea to solve all these problems isn't going to happen. And once people give up that idea that a fresh new approach will, if there were one, then there would be some yeast as smart as us. It took a lot of accidents. If you ask Google for Marvin Minsky, then you'll get my webpage. And in the lower right-hand corner of my homepage, there's a title called The Emotion Machine. And you can click on various chapters of this book I'm just finishing. So I feel sort of silly talking at all these days since I've got all this ideas. And this book is an attempt to draft what kind of architecture it would take to make a machine that does some of the sorts of things that people do. And I suspect that once people start moving from the magic bullet idea, like genetic algorithms or neural nets or universal mathematical logic, there's a dozen such fads. The worst fad is building little stupid robots. And this happens in universities all over the world. And some of the best potential scientists, graduate students, waste 2 or 3 years learning to solder things and fix broken connectors until they finally get some really dumb machine that can move around the room and fuse the information from various sensors to get around an obstacle. It's really shocking. And so that's one of the fads that's been the worst of all. Every university has a robotics section, and they never work on making the robot smart. They work on optimizing how it can do something with the smallest possible number of joints. Whereas you know that if one of your joints doesn't work, if my elbow doesn't work, I'm not going to be able to button my shirt, but I'll be able to do most things. You should never make a machine that has just the minimum number of degrees of freedom, and that's what most of this robotic stuff is about. Okay, that's what I said. This is a vicious circle you get into where artificial intelligence researchers argue, and one says, you really should use logic because it's unambiguous and you can be sure that your deductions are right, and somebody else says, no, it's too inflexible. it is actually too inexpressive. Nobody has gotten a logical system to make even childish analogies. And I think most of thinking is by analogy. Logic is what you do afterwards to clean the thing up and take out the stuff that wasn't absolutely necessary. And now me and my student Push Singh, who's hiding back there, are suggesting that another way to represent knowledge, which has been really rejected out of hand, is why not have the machine do most of its thinking in English? And somebody would say, well, natural language is too ambiguous. You've got to use things that are well defined. And I think that's profoundly wrong. The great thing about natural language is that each word has a dozen meanings, and these have gotten collected to go with the same sound, but they're in different realms of thought. And the beautiful thing about, except for the words where the same sound came from two different languages, so it has two completely different meanings. That's not very useful. But but each word, other than that, contains metaphors that have been evolved by millions of people for thousands of years, generally. And it's the ambiguities that allow you, when something, particular formulation doesn't work, to change the meaning a little bit, and you have a chance of not getting stuck. So the logician's idea that you want to be very logical so you're not confused and ambiguous is okay in a mathematical world, but it's not okay in a world where you're learning by example and analogy. So the latest kind of theory that we're working on is, might sound sort of silly, and there has been some research on trying to get common sense knowledge into computers, and a good example is the only good example is the work of Douglas Lennett in Texas, Austin, and he's tried to assemble a few million facts of things that most everybody knows. But he started out, or tried to do this rather logically. So it starts out with the idea that there's three kinds of things. Well, and some of them are physical and some are mental, and I forget the third one. And so you get and then when you have physical things, you have animal, mineral, and vegetable, and that sort of thing. And before long, you run into the problem that birds are animals and they can fly, and airplanes are minerals and they can fly. And so if you try to make an orderly hierarchy without enough cross connections, you get two rather similar things, but they're very far apart in the tree. And so trying to make an orderly, what did Mortimer Adler call his great attempt to classify all knowledge when he was in charge of the, was it the Britannica? Syntopticon. That's an okay idea if you make enough cross connections, but if you try to make things neat and hierarchical, you're going to put some things very far apart because their functions are similar, but their structure is different. And when Lennett made that division, he emphasized the structure of things rather than the function. And so there, as they say, there are many ways to skin a cat, and they'll be all in different parts of the diagram because those are things that achieve goals. So what I've concluded after some years of struggling with this common sense problem is that what you really want to do with knowledge is you want to classify it by what sorts of problems it can solve. Because after all, what's knowledge for? Knowledge is for doing something, accomplishing something, solving a problem, even if the problem is understanding something else. And we don't have a classification of that sort. So in Lennett's marvelous system called Psych, short for encyclopedia, there isn't any goal-directed way to access the kind of knowledge you need for some job. So I think we need, for psychology, we need a slightly different approach, and that is what kinds of problems are there and what kinds of ways to think about problems are there. And I won't say any more about that because You can go to my webpage and see an awful lot of speculation about how to make a machine that's based on knowledge about what kinds of problems there are and what kinds of methods there are for solving them. We're just starting to plan a project to actually do that. The model I have of what an intelligent machine would be like is sort of funny. It says that we must have evolved in many stages, and these stages are ill-defined, but you know, bacteria and any cell has a whole bunch of programmed reactions of various sorts. None of them can solve, no single cell can solve a problem by imagining two different actions, envisioning the result, and then comparing them. And that's what we do on what we call the deliberative level. Then something people do, and maybe a few primates, called the reflective level, is you work on a problem and you say, well, I'm not getting anywhere. Maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way, or maybe I don't know enough, or whatever. That's where humans, I think some animals can do deliberate thinking of envisioning two alternatives, but, and then these top ones, self-reflective thinking and self-conscious emotions, are somewhat different, but I think we need all of these levels, and we don't need a magic bullet that tries to do everything. Funny thing is, after I worked out this general scheme, it looked a lot like Freud, and if you look at early Freud, you see here's the first person who tried to make a sophisticated architecture of how the mind works. So he has theories of, well, such and such could happen, but then there's a bug. What happens if you keep returning to the same idea? The answer is you probably can't fix bugs. Nobody's ever written a large program that's perfect the first time. So maybe you have to add other things, critics and censors, that notice bad behavior and just suppress it. And so that's where I'm going on trying to imagine a big machine that's smart. The main thing is I'm not looking for an elegant solution which just has one or two or three parts. Making it more on the model of a large computer system that works pretty well but has bugs, and then people come and patch the bugs. That's what evolution does. It can't, if you found something wrong with how mitochondria work, you probably couldn't do anything about it because everything depends on it, even on the bugs of how it works. But for high-level things, we can meddle around and we could reroute various bundles of pathways of things. So that's all I have to say. I was very amused the other day. I think it was in Nature. There was a nice article on proton pumps and metabolism, and it mentioned that people use about average person uses about 130 watts, and all of this energy is produced by pumping protons through these membranes, and and the potential across the membrane is about 0.2 volts. So if you do a little arithmetic, you see that you're being constantly powered by a 500 ampere current, which would be enough to start your car if you had it. Well, I think when we make these 1-inch people, they'll probably run on very small fractions of a watt, and you can have 100 million of them if you want, or you can have 1 trillion, and there'll still be room on the Earth for very smart creatures that they too will spend most of their time at conferences about what will happen in the future. But I'm hoping there's any future at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I prepared something that says normally 5 minutes, but then I decided not to show it to you when you read my mind. I would like to have a copy of your slides because I like this very much.
Oh.
Would it be possible?
Sure.
Or on your site, I don't know what.
Well, I have it in this little memory chip here. All I have to do is plug it into your USB port.
Okay. Well, next person is Christine Peterson. Peterson, is that right? Yeah. And I know very little about you.
Okay.
I will not make an introduction. Anyway, well-known people, you know, when you make introductions, you always say wrong things. And if there's something relevant, you will say it by yourself.
Is that okay? All right. Oh, here comes AV help. Oh, 30 seconds. You told me to wait. All right. Excellent. Let me grab some more. So one of our previous speakers had pointed out that when you're looking at this kind of time frame, no matter how outlandish a prediction you try to make, it's too conservative. So I took that seriously, and I'm going to be as outlandish as possible here. And I think it's worth keeping in mind that this is probably too conservative. So rather than ask, can we change human nature, I'm just assuming, I'm assuming that our first two speakers are right and that coming fairly soon, I don't think they gave any numbers really, although I think I heard one of them say in the next 2 decades, but I don't want to hold them to that. We're going to be doing genetic engineering of humans, if not in the US, then in China and places like that, and that it could affect human nature. So rather than say, could we change it, my goal is, well, can we preserve it? I kind of like humans. So we're going to move, plus I'm assuming that Marvin Minsky is right and that we're going to have other kinds of computational entities. Whoops. There. So I'm taking our task seriously. By that I mean the time frame, the 50 to 250-year time frame. Really hard to do. And when you do it, invariably what you come up with sounds like science fiction. And there's a reason for that, because science fiction writers spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, and some of them aren't too stupid, actually. Some of them have backgrounds in physics and biology, and actually do fairly well, a few of them. And I'll point out that if we're taking this task seriously, and it sounds like science fiction, we might be wrong. But if it doesn't, we're definitely wrong. So let's go ahead and just accept that right up front. So what is human nature? I'm certainly not taking that one on. I'll just say it's a set of characteristics we've had for quite a while. I'm refusing to define it. There's a famous judge on another topic. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Let's just go with that for now. I'm not going to try to do a definition. So let's see how we could preserve what at least what I value, I think many of us value, into the long-term future, into this very bizarre future, really. One of our previous speakers said I can't picture what's going to come in 200 years, and none of us can. This is going to be really bizarre. Let's see if we can keep people around for that period. I'd really like to do that. So our species, I'm just saying, we share human nature. That's it. Let's just go with that for now. Well, how do you even begin to do this bizarre task? Well, I'm going to go with the laws of physics as a ground. As we currently understand them, yes, our understanding improves over time, but I'm going to assume that they're not going to change a lot in the next 250 years. I mean, you have to start somewhere, right? Let's start there. By laws of economics, I don't mean fancy, complicated macroeconomics. I mean things like people want more money, okay? Let's just assume people tend to want more money. And then laws of human nature, where for the purpose of this talk, I'm defining it as roughly stable, something we're trying to preserve as is. I don't mean anything complicated here either, and in particular what I'm pointing at is the tendency of some subset of our species to do creative engineering and push technology forward. I know a lot of these people. They can't help it. It's in their nature. They're like artists, you know. You can't keep an artist from doing their art. You can't keep a creative engineer from doing creative engineering. So what do you get if you add those up? Technological advance to the limits allowed by nature. That doesn't give you a time estimate. We have some tools for doing time estimates. Moore's law has been pretty useful. It's been holding for a number of decades now. If you just take that one example, and there are other examples, and say, all right, when do you get our last point? Example, total control of structure of matter down to individual atoms. Actual control down to that level. Moore's law hits the atomic level somewhere around, I believe it's, I'm told, 2015, 2017, something like that. And that's coming up really soon, right? That is way before our 50-year minimum time requirement that we're supposed to be trying to do here in this room. So I'm going to assume that this is going to happen, okay? If you take that view seriously, what you see ahead is what some of us call molecular manufacturing. It's really a new way of thinking about the physical world around us. Today, you can have atomic precision at very small scales. That's called chemistry. You can make large, complex structures that are not atomically precise, but you can't do both. The goal would be to do both. Let's be able to build everything we want to build, no matter how big it is. Let's be able to control it down to the atomic level. Now, of course, the most exciting application is to the human body. If there's one thing we'd like to be able to repair at the atomic level, it's the human body. So at our last point, can change or improve the structure, in theory, of all physical things, including the human body. So if you can do that, you should be able to tackle all diseases and aging. So how do you do it? What makes us think you can do this, ever? Well, you have to be inspired by how living systems do it. I mean, how is the body created in the first place? We are systems of molecular machines. That's what's inside us. And that's not a cutesy phrase or an analogy or some kind of artist's explanation. There actually are little machines in there. Your muscles, I'm told, are linear motors. There are proton pumps. There are bacterial flagellar motors that turn things around. These are like little machines. They're not like little machines. These are little machines. Okay, it's really hard to really grasp that if you're not in the field. So we're beginning to learn how to control those in the biological sphere. We heard a lot about genetic engineering. But the purpose of this talk is to look beyond that and say, what about if we don't have to use nature's machines anymore? What if we could learn to design our own machines that are quite different? This is an extremely difficult technological goal. I can't overemphasize that. But remember the time frame we're looking at here. Very long term. Plus, there are reasons, as I explained with Moore's Law, there are reasons to think that we're moving along on this one. The economic payoffs are immense with this. And even if they weren't, the military payoffs are immense for this. So there's huge momentum behind this ability to control the structure of matter, the physical structure of our world around us. I mean, that's what our species has been trying to do for a very long time. This is not a new project. This is just the continuation of a really old project we've been doing. So here's a typical design that comes out of this. This is a cutaway view, so you're seeing inside. This is a differential gear. You can see in this design the individual molecules and atoms here. And I'm told you have differential gears in your cars. Is that right? Okay. People are assuring me, yes, there are differential gears in your cars. Well, this one's really small. This is the tip of a design for a fine motion controller, which is basically something that would move around like a 6 degree of freedom little robot arm that would, in order to build things at this level, you've got to have something that moves around at that level and is able to bring things together. This is just a design for the tip of that. These aren't artists' conception. No. Number one, these have not been built yet. They're not going to be built for quite a while. But it is also not an artist's conception. These aren't just pretty pictures. These are actual designs based on our current understanding of how atoms and molecules work. And there is software you can get, and you can do this yourself. This is really fun. Not that I can do it. Other people can do it. So what are the results? I mentioned some medical results. But what this does is it gives you the hardware, raw power. I'm told that with this, you could build the hardware that would enable 1 billion desktop machine equivalents of today's desktop machines in the volume of a sugar cube. And that's minimum. Okay, that's not maximum. That's a minimum. Of course, you do need some software to run these things. And to do really advanced stuff, you need really great software. Now, I put here raw power plus evolutionary strategies. By this, I do not mean genetic algorithms. We were just hearing that they're not all that extremely powerful. What I'm referring to here is a brute force approach of saying, fine, we've seen how evolution created intelligence before, and if necessary, we're just going to model it to whatever level of detail required and do it again. Now, this is pretty brute force, and hopefully it wouldn't come to that, but we could resort to that. So that gives you human-level machine intelligence on the near end of this time frame we're supposed to be looking at. And then, as Marvin mentioned, he said something about networking. I'm assuming these things could work together, as we have so much trouble doing ourselves, but they, in theory, could be connected up. So we're not just talking about human-level machine intelligence, we're talking about something smarter than we are. So this is kind of disturbing. Meanwhile, we've been looking at genetic engineering as a form of directed evolution. And I'm assuming all that is going to happen, that that is correct, it's coming. But these options I'm sketching here, which are longer term, would exceed that in power. You could, in principle, construct tissues and organs without using the biological mechanisms. The end product could look just the same, as someone was pointing out. You know, if you do genetic engineering really well, the final product, you can't tell that it was done. That would be true for this, too. You know, I need a new liver, let's build a new liver, let's not use biological mechanisms at all. But the liver itself at the end looks just the same. You put it in, the body can't tell the difference. But you don't have to build a liver. I mean, you can, because it's non-biological, you could build things that are much more bizarre than a liver. Or something perhaps that does the full function of a liver but doesn't look at all like a regular liver. Now, one of our previous speakers pointed out, well, this doesn't make you very sexually attractive, and certainly if this stuff is on the outside, this could put people off pretty seriously. But we're presuming some of this it's on the inside in most cases. Although, if you think about what teenagers do to their bodies, I think we have to realize there could be some rather odd things going on. They like all kinds of stuff that really put you and I off, so we have to realize that. So what comes out of this? There's this concern about making genetic changes to our offspring, and it's a legitimate concern. We're passing on things which we can't ask them, do you want this? And conceivably, if there was a problem, it's kind of hard to fix. So that there are reasons to be concerned about making these genetic changes to our kids. But there are other ways to do it. You don't have to make changes to the genes themselves. This enables you to just say, leave the genes there, don't touch them. Let's make our changes other ways. Another result one should assume, and we heard earlier about these carbon-silicon chimeras, in other words, the integration of machines into humans, and this shouldn't put us off. We've already started integrating machines into humans. I mean, we do simple things. I shouldn't call them simple. I can't do it, but artificial hearts. But we've already started implanting chips into people. I believe the current goal is to help the blind get some signals into their brains based on visual input. But this is already starting. I think in the time frame we're looking at, we really should expect, certainly if nanotechnology happens, we should expect seamless integration. So these man-machine mixes should be pretty seamless, which could mean that the human body, which looks standard on the outside for the reasons pointed out earlier, could be inside quite different and could include immense computation abilities and recording abilities for their sense data, including new senses if those would be desired, which means that Hollywood's goal of trying to charge you every time you see a movie, they've just got to give up on that, okay? Because you're going to be recording all these movies you see, and you can run them anytime. So someone should just tell them to give up right now on that, because eventually they're going to lose. We heard a bit earlier about cultural attitudes, kind of an East-West thing. I totally agree with that. These controversial biological technologies, these attitudes vary by country, and as was pointed out, Asia in particular doesn't necessarily share our inhibitions on this stuff. Neither does Sweden, by the way. I mean, Sweden's moving right along. So lots of places are moving along. So we can't just assume that what we do in the US is going to have much impact on this at all. One upside here is that there was some concern, I think, expressed earlier that if the West fights this and the East goes forward, that there's an imbalance, and that could well be true. But if we can find a non-biological way to address some of these issues, that doesn't raise all these what are basically often religious-based concerns. If we can just sidestep that and fix our problems other ways, that might help us even out between these two approaches. Already, of course, this is very controversial. Leon Cass, an ethics advisor to the president, opposes life extension, and I have been hearing from other speakers many other things that I think are pretty good, whereas the head of our National Nanotechnology Initiative is in favor of improving human performance enhancement. And I've been pretty amazed. He's just plowing ahead with this, and this is a big conflict. I think the administration just hasn't noticed what he's up to yet. But regardless of the current controversies here, Asia is moving ahead, and I think there are economic and military reasons. I think the West will feel it has to move ahead with technology in general. If not genetic engineering, then nanotechnology. So I'm assuming here that in the future, we heard earlier about the value of diversity. I'm assuming that's going to be the case, that we have traditional humans, we have augmented humans, either by genetic engineering or by these machine enhancements that I've described. And I see people taking notes. I'm happy to send you these slides if you want them. You don't have to do that. And then, of course, the machine-based intelligences that I mentioned as well. So you have a world of diversity. You hope you have a world of diversity. This is the goal, okay? This isn't the downside. This is the goal. Because if not, we're the losers, okay? We want that diversity. So what are the goals? How do you keep this peaceful coexistence? Well, we certainly want augmentation to be voluntary. Lots of folks don't want this stuff. Now, lots of folks don't want this stuff for themselves. They also don't want this stuff for anybody else. But I'm assuming that view has kind of fallen by the wayside. And I think we've heard reasons already from our previous speakers that when push comes to shove, people say parents should make these decisions for their kids. So I think that's just going to go forward. But it should certainly be voluntary. And if you use nanotechnology, it can be voluntary not for your children, but for yourself. In other words, it could be up not to the parents, but to the individual himself or herself, because an adult could make changes. So we don't have to use this technology that is kind of forced on our kids. We could instead say, no, we're going to let the kid decide. When you're 18 or 21, you make your own decisions. You know, it's an idea. Certainly voluntary within the family, you know, in terms of you wouldn't want this forced on you from outside. But there's a power imbalance here, and we heard earlier, again, a phrase I thought was very useful from a previous speaker. It was about power, you know, there's about power and dominance. There's a power imbalance here between these entities in terms of intelligence, and of course with intelligence, presumably with wealth. And along with wealth comes physical coercion ability, military ability. So there's this imbalance, and it's not in our favor if we are the way we are today. So you want to protect the weaker entities, as we do today in society, right? This is what police and military are all about, protecting weaker members of society from those who would push them around. So we want to protect all of these entities from physical coercion. And if we think about preserving traditional human families and communities, which I favor, I want folks to be able to continue to live the way they want to live. And I don't care whether it's for religious reasons, cultural reasons, whatever. And just as an aside, people don't necessarily always adopt traditional human ways and even religious ways for religious reasons. I know at least some people follow fairly orthodox Jewish traditions, not necessarily because for religious reasons, but because they value that way of life, and they like the results that it has for their families and their communities. So I think they should have that choice. So what do they need in order to do that? They need to be able to live without interference of physical force or very high levels of taxation such that they can't continue. And we can take the Amish as an example. We protect the Amish. They are protected they're protected against foreign invasion. Somehow or other, they managed to survive despite, actually, I believe they pay regular taxes. I don't know how they pull that one off. I guess they're smart that they can pull that off, considering that they're not using the latest technology. So we want to make it so that folks can continue to live the way they want to live, if at all possible. So how do you do that? We're looking around. What do we have for analogies today for entities more powerful than we are, that are smarter, richer? Let's not say smarter. Let's say richer and have more physical coercion ability. Well, the main one would be government. Some would say corporations, but I'm looking also at really just straight physical coercion here. And what have we come up with? So far, the best thing we've come up with are checks and balances. Within the government, regarded as a segmented entity, play the different parts off against each other. I am told that game theory could be of use here. I'm not a game theorist. I'm hoping that's right. I know that Eric Drexler is looking at this, and I'm going to ask Marvin Minsky when I get his attention. Marvin, do you know anybody else who's working on game theory for controlling of AI? Anybody looking at that?
Well, the AIs are so crude.
I mean, future. Okay, think about it and come back to me, okay? Anyway, so I know Drexler's working on it. So he may be the only one, but maybe Marvin will think of somebody else. So what's the summary? In the time frame we're looking at, which is very far off, we're looking at advanced molecular manufacturing, machine intelligence, that are surpassing what we see coming very quickly now, which is the genetic engineering techniques. And a future of diversity, the traditional humans, augmented humans of various kinds, and machine intelligences. And the goal, my goal, would be to try to protect the safety and assets of these traditional humans, defined to be those who share human nature. If you like this kind of wild stuff, which I hope you do since you're here at this meeting, we do this all the time at Foresight, and we have similar kinds of conferences. Next one's coming up in early May. And there's a couple books there at the bottom that talk about this kind of thing. So that's it. I really tried to push it right out to the edge. I hope I succeeded. It should sound like science fiction. I hope it did. Thank you very much. Sitting up here?
Marvin, do you want to come here, Marvin, for questions and answers? Well, go ahead. Think about some questions and feel free to maybe just.
Is this working? Hi, I have a question about artificial intelligence and what we might call as digital entities. If these programs become so complex, and particularly if they have access to the internet and the World Wide Web and all the machines eventually that computers will control, I'm actually concerned about them being a possible security threat when they get smart enough. And just to make one point, although genetic programming is not very powerful today, in combination with other kinds of AI programming and them being interfaced, one can imagine digital entities evolving on a nanosecond timescale, so they could do what took us 1 billion years of evolution in a second. So I'm actually quite concerned that will happen, and maybe even sooner than 50 years.
Those are nice problems because, and they've been explored in science fiction quite a lot. The Colossus novel by D.F. Jones, who died recently, was made into a movie called The Forbin Project, inexplicably changing a great title into a meaningless one. And that machine was a combination of various defense computers which spontaneously started to figure out what it or they were doing, and it became super intelligent in 15 minutes and took over the world for reasons that were unsuccessfully explained in 2 sequels. So I think that's a serious problem. When you get past a certain point, then you get a singularity and the machines get out of reach, and probably most of them will be insane. And so I recall in Eric Drexler's first book, there was the question of what would, if you made a self-reproducing machine that worked very fast, then, and it got out of the lab, then it could cause a lot of trouble. And he had various proposals, like you should only be allowed to do those inside little shells of TNT, and presumably if you blew it up, that would be fine. So I think one has to be careful. Right now, I don't expect the machines to become super intelligent in 15 minutes, but you could have something where in a few days this could happen, and you'd have to watch out and not give it too much access to the net. On the other hand, the same thing happens in human society, and somebody gets an idea and it spreads over the world. I don't feel as benign toward religion as Christine might, but what happens is that billions of minds are ruined by little clusters of bad ideas. And it's all right, because you only need a few thousand good minds anyway. Progress is fast enough, but
Is that it?
yeah.
I'd like to address that too. I think this is a real concern, a very serious concern, and much earlier than a 50-year time horizon. I don't know exactly when it kicks in, and regardless of this exact intelligence level of whatever these software entities have. I mean, right now we have dumb ones that go around causing tremendous damage.
Like Windows.
Now, there's a religious issue. We both are on Macintosh. But so whether they're stupid or a little smarter or where they are, these things currently careen around the system, causing damage, showing, first of all, that the system is totally insecure, and that if someone did come up with something a little smarter that decided, well, I think I'll just go out and take computing power, take control of computing power, I think it's perfectly possible. And if I ran the Homeland Security Department today, I would start to implement some kind of policy to encourage the conversion to more secure operating systems and more secure communication protocols or whatever, because we can't have our society dependent on an insecure communication and information system. It's nuts. It's stupid today, and it gets more and more stupid as time goes by. And so, yeah, I think, and Marvin made a comment about Windows. In a way, it's kind of not a joke here. This is a very serious thing. You know, our machines are out of control. And I don't know about you, but this is part of my brain now. I can't function without my computer. A lot of me is in that computer now. And to lose control of that would be a big problem for me. So yeah, I want to get that straightened out, and really soon. Let's hear from him.
There's a question here.
Hello. One of the things we've been talking about today a bit is diversity, and I think there's some confusion about, and we want to protect diversity. I think there's some confusion about molding together genetic diversity versus cultural diversity. I mean, if all the genetic engineering things that we're talking about actually happen, they're not going to happen to everybody. That's not going to limit diversity. That's going to increase diversity. And we're already 50-fold more diverse as a species than we were in the time of Jesus Christ. So if we lost 49% of our diversity, we'd still have the same diversity as human populations had 2,000 years ago. But we're talking about cultural diversity, and that's happening. We're losing cultural diversity right now, not because we're destroying it, because the people themselves are destroying it. If you go to a small village in northern Vietnam, for example, and you have these cultural traditions, and the kids are getting MTV down on their televisions, and they're all aping Americans, and they don't want to be like their parents, all those cultures are being eliminated. That's not something of the future. It's being eliminated right now. What are you going to do about that if the people themselves don't want to maintain the diversity, and they all want to become westernized?
You want me to do that one?
Sure.
Well, I don't think that, you notice one of the emphasis in my talk was on what's voluntary. And I would not suggest that it should be up to anyone else, specifically us or Americans, to tell folks in other countries, young people in other countries, what kind of culture they should have, or that we should try to restrict their choices. I don't see how to stop that, and even though languages are being lost, traditional ways of life are being lost, but the only way to preserve those would be to use some kind of coercion on these people, and I'm just not okay with that. On the other hand, it's true those kinds of diversity are being lost, but if you look at, say, the explosion of subcultures in the United States, we are seeing new kinds of diversity. Is it more valuable or less valuable? I'm not going to try to take that on, but all I'm going to do is say, well, I'm not going to use coercion to keep kids in the third world from watching MTV. I just can't. I can't go with that. No matter what's being lost, I can't say that. That's the best I can say.
I have a question myself to both of you. A theme that has not been touched is, I think that we are at the beginning of a fork in evolution, in human evolution, in this sense that one way is the eusocial way, like ants and termites and so on. That is, you have superorganisms that are formed out of cells, ourselves or out of individuals, but the relevance shifts from the individual ant to the whole anthill. So the anthill has goals, and the ants are just cells of that organism. Another standard way to have accelerated evolution, besides I'm contrasting these forms of evolution with the normal way of DNA, small DNA changes. Another way is the one that's suggested by Lynn Margolis, who I don't know whether she's here. She should be talking tomorrow. That is the one of incubation of ready-made entities, some sort of parasitism, where we have mitochondria that are essentially probably, there used to be wild bacteria, and we incorporated the whole thing. Now, what is happening now with computers being essentially used as a nervous system for large organizations, for these super organizations, that we are entering a eusocial stage in which the individuals, the goals of individuals are often trampled on by the goals of these other organizations that are composed of individuals but are not human individuals themselves. Another possibility would be the empowering of individuals by a method very similar to the one that you mentioned a moment ago. You said, this computer is an extension of my brain. It's to find ways for ordinary people to become more powerful as ordinary people by introducing cultures, a bit like the culture of literacy, but a literacy that instead of having that word that comes to life only when you read it or when you write it, having computers that are part of the literacy so that they become your servants without having to use Filipino maids as servants, because the Filipino maids, of course, eventually don't want to be your servants. If we can find ways for the individual to become powerful enough and maybe defended enough with some sort of a shell outside, I call it the knowledge home in the project that I'm working, but essentially a shell that is a bit outside of our body that includes your computers, your repositories of knowledge, and so on. And I think we are at the moment where we might be able to influence the evolution to take one or the other branch of the fork. I don't know which one you like. I prefer the latter one. Mm-hmm. This is the question to both of you, whether you see this, that something may be done at this stage.
Well, I don't see much difference between one protozoan incorporating another one, or once I was building a mechanical hand and I hired a mechanical engineer. And there's one cell absorbing another
you
for...
You extended yourself.
I extended myself. What happened, of course, it was David Waltz, who's a distinguished researcher, and as soon as he got into the AI environment, he said, well, I'm not interested in mechanical hands, I want to make it smart, and he became one of the professors in vision science, so it didn't work, but that's what happens when you try to absorb something. You may change yourself more than...
Well, that is exactly the point. That is literacy, for instance, as an expansion of yourself, requires a lot of investment on yourself.
But
on the other hand,
you're not
buying
just
CDs,
expanding yourself, you're actually... you have to insulate yourself against having smart friends if you want to preserve yourself.
That as well, yes. If you buy a CD, you do not develop musicianship. The effort of playing badly the piano for the development of yourself is much more important than the effort of buying 17 CDs. This is my view. So you can hire an engineer. If it's not just that, you pay money, you get an engineer. You have to change yourself in order to be able to hire an engineer and use him instead of being used.
Do you want to comment?
I'm lost. I like the idea of preserving cultures, only I hate cultures because each culture to me is a prison in which somebody can't develop anything else. So it's really, I agree with Christine that you don't want to use coercion of any sort to imprison somebody in that. And so it's nice as a luxury for me to be able to see these other cultures, but I feel that those people, the culture means that they will never learn any mathematics. They will never understand anything. Cultures to me are
they will
diseases.
Remain cute,
Yes,
essentially.
travel. They're sort of travel benefits to us. and that's
Disneylands for
yeah.
us.
Can I take a shot at that? Yeah, I think you're right. Right now, we're seeing the early signs of what will become a more and more powerful question, which is, will these new technologies be used to empower the individual, or will these new technologies be used to empower larger other institutions in society and to control the individual? And we see the early signs of this today, and in fact, I think it's really important to step up to these issues today and try to tweak them in the right direction, because how we tweak them today is just going to propagate into the future. We're setting legal precedents, and these go on. You get a legal precedent in there, it can just go for a long time. The two that come to mind today, I made a kind of a joke in my talk about movies and remembering movies, but the battle that's going on now between are individuals to be allowed to own general purpose computing, hardware and software that can, for example, record information and play it back. Is this to be a legal thing to have, or are we going to make that illegal? And Hollywood wants to make it illegal, and they're really fighting hard, and they're winning. Okay, so this is a real problem because whatever happens with your computer today is going to happen someday to somebody's head, because this stuff is going to merge inside. So,
but look at the biologists patenting gene manipulation techniques. It's a very strange situation of the idea of intellectual property, because I don't have any. I get ideas which are combinations of things that my mentors had and so forth. And I think we're getting into a very strange thing with, I have a simple solution for it. No lawyers should be ever allowed in legislatures because it's a profound conflict of interest. But I think Christine is right. We're getting, and it's sneaking up on you. You know your CD won't play in Europe now.
Right. So we're losing this one, and it's a problem. Both of these that I'm mentioning are intellectual property issues. The other one that that bothers the heck out of me is I believe I can't almost not believe this is true. Maybe someone can contradict me, but I believe it's sort of a criminal thing now to do reverse engineering. And I don't know if you can certainly be charged a huge amount of money, and for all I know, I think you can actually go to jail for doing reverse engineering on products. And that's just profoundly wrong, because as the world around us becomes increasingly artificial, regardless of how you feel about that, the very minimum thing we can say is, well, gosh, we should be allowed to find out what it is, if only for security reasons. Is this yours?
Yeah.
Marvin has this thing here. I don't have a clue what this thing is. It's a security issue for me to know what this is. I need to be able to have at least some right to find out what's in my physical
It
environment.
records 8 hours of audio, including what you just said.
Well, but that's what he says it does. We don't know what it really does. Anyway, so if you think about the future generations of kids, you know, in the past, one of the wonderful things about being a kid is exploring your physical environment. Well, what happens when the world is increasingly artificial and now the kids, well, you can't take that apart. You're not allowed to take that apart, okay? I have real issues with this, and the whole intellectual property thing is a big concern for me. My solution, his solution, I like his solution. My solution is open source. I promote open source as much as I can, not just in software, but in hardware as well.
You have to talk more. I like your answer.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you, thank you. I'll have to write a book or something.
Yeah.
Well, come to my conference in early May, then you'll have more.
Okay. Okay, and then we have
yeah,
one more question over here.
This question is mostly directed at Christine Peterson. Okay. The title of your talk was Preserving Human Nature. And I think that's a very central issue that makes the general public uncomfortable with all these ideas that we're discussing here. And there are two things that I see is, first of all, with the changes that are coming, there's clearly going to be a sort of interregnum with a lot of chaos, and you spoke to that about protecting people who don't choose to go that way. But from the way you were talking about it, I got the feeling that you didn't like the idea of, in 250 years, not having human nature around anymore. And I wonder why that is.
I like lots of species, okay? I like all the, I suppose there are species I don't like. Mosquitoes have always been a problem for me, but I like all the species, and we're one, and just because there's something else doesn't make our species any less valuable. I love our species, so.
So are you mourning dinosaurs?
Well, sure, wouldn't we all, I mean, wouldn't we all like to have the dinosaurs back? I mean, not the kind with the, you know, the big teeth and all that, but no, I mean, yeah, I mourn the dinosaurs. I'd love to see a real dinosaur. I think it would be cool.
But I'm not sure you're identifying really what it is that makes you feel that way.
Well, it doesn't really matter, you know?
It matters in the sense that we want to understand why people are afraid of this technology. We want to
Yeah,
understand
yeah,
the source of that worry.
right. Yes, that's a big issue, and I don't have any answers for that.
May I provide
Yeah,
an
yeah,
answer to that?
please.
You were talking about mourning and other things like that. You will mourn your child if your child died more than somebody else's children because it's your child. It's part of your history line, not only of a germ line, but it's part of the way, in a great sense, and we see that there is much more plasticity in humans than it was thought before. We are our history. And now if you take a line of history and you cut it off, you're cutting off yourself. I like humans to be around because I'm a human. I love to be a human. I love myself, and I would like more of that. You know, other people, corporations, churches, they can take care of themselves. They love themselves. They want to reproduce and so on. Let them do that. I'm not opposed to that. But if I don't take care of myself, or my culture, my history, no one else will. People will sell me cigarettes or Microsoft, operating systems, because it's in their interest, not in mine. I have to know what is my interest, and that takes expanding my knowledge and my powers in order to defend it. But the reason why I'm doing for my interest and instead of somebody else is because it's mine.
Can I follow up on this question here? My ancestor was a monkey, and so was yours. And what Darwin told us is that evolution makes species go extinct. I mean, the main purpose of evolution is, some individuals in a species are able to outcompete other individuals in the species. The species goes extinct. So all of our ancestral species, Homo erectus and Homo habilis, they all went extinct. Now we're going to die. Okay, there's nothing we can do about that, okay? And the genes that we carry, even if we have children, just statistically, they're probably going to die off as well also. So what difference does it make if 10,000 years from now, the descendants of the human species don't have a human nature. They have some other kind of nature. What is so sacred about human nature?
Who are you asking?
Well, anybody who wants to answer. Because, I mean, Christine was the one who thought that human nature was sacred.
I did not say sacred.
I know you did.
Ever.
I'm putting the word in your mouth.
Don't do that.
But Marvin.
There is an answer, I suppose, there, or a question or whatever. Okay, yeah.
No, I think this is really a very important discussion because, in fact, indeed, there's a tension here, and and I think both answers were really, or both comments here were really very relevant. Here, you're talking about 10,000 years from now. Okay, you were talking about yourself and your child, so this makes a very big difference. I think that it's very difficult for people to, they're getting used to themselves in some fashion, and then, let's say, in 5 minutes, they discover they're somebody totally different, you see, in a totally unpredictable way. So if you really had that choice, being myself, who you got to like, and suddenly being somebody else totally in an unpredictable way, most people perhaps will choose being themselves. What happens in 10,000 years, that'll be fine. I mean, also in 4 billion years, the world, the universe will, the Earth will disappear. That's also fine. This is too far away. And really what people are afraid, I presume, in the Senate, in the governments and all that, is not so much what is going to happen in 200 or 300 years, but really what is going to happen within their own generation. And that's a tension, and I think it's really, in some sense, worth exploring. I mean, it really goes back to the notions of human nature, of the sense of community, and also this is another issue about cultures. You say, okay, you don't like those. Metcalf said didn't like culture. I mean, in fact, first of all, you belong to a culture.
That's
whether
different.
you want it or not, and in many ways you like your culture, presumably, because that's the culture that you want to stay in and don't like the others. And so you have already a set of preferences here. And in many ways, you have values, okay, and your values are perhaps increasing knowledge or science and all that, so you value people knowing mathematics, science, and working in that. Other people have other values, based on their history, on preserving their family, preserving their way of life, because they like it, they enjoy it, they wouldn't have any fun doing any mathematics or doing any physics. So, we really, at this stage, if we want really to understand the source of resistance, and the source of resistance exists everywhere at all kinds of levels, modularizations and resistance towards that and all this, one has really to take into account this basic desire of people preserving their lives, preserving their history, because in a sense, that's their sense. If you destroy that, even if I destroyed if I forbade you to do science or mathematics or anything like that, or any of the type of things you are used in doing, you would be a very unhappy man. And in some fassion, this is what's happening.
Maybe it's good to be unhappy.
Well, okay, all right, but you may not choose it.
Like
but you may not choose it. It's good, but you wouldn't, given a choice, you would not want it.
It doesn't matter. You see, one of the things that I try to do is if I like something very much, then I try not to automatically persist in it, but I try to say, there's what we might call the pleasure of exploration. You could say there's a basic desire not to hurt, and yet you see mountain climbers crawling, hanging on their fingernails and so forth. I think most of what you said sounded to me, I don't know whether the word shallow is, but you say people want this, people want that, but on different scales they want different things. It seems to me that a lot of what we call human values are based on the idea that you're going to die, so it's not very important what you do, and maybe you want to have children, but you don't have a larger scale. What if we're the only intelligent thing in the universe? Then we're the only thing that gives meaning to it, and we shouldn't care. When you say, I want to preserve human nature, you could generalize that and say, I want to be sure there's something smart in the world that can make sense of it or bring sense to it when there isn't any. That's another scale, and that's a human thing too. It's not whether you like to eat frog's legs, which is what cultures mean to me. That is, things that you like that give you security that are utterly arbitrary and demeaning in any larger scale. So
That's the whole question. It's a question of scale.
Marvin or?
Dr. Silver, when this is done.
We'll have an answer here.
I just wanted to get back to your question. Why is it upsetting to have the prospect that there might not be human nature, and why is that upsetting? To me, it's upsetting. One of the reasons it's upsetting, I have various sentimental reasons, but to be more abstract, right now, today, there's the earth, there's people on it, these people have land they control. They want to have children. There's a large fraction of these people, and I don't know how that fraction will change over time, but there is certainly a fraction, a non-zero fraction of these people who want to remain human for religious reasons or any reason. I don't care. There's some reason. They want to continue the way they are. They want to have kids in the standard way. If we don't have people 10,000 years from now, and it wasn't because of an asteroid, then there's something that interfered with that. Some coercive process, either they took this, something more powerful or richer or smarter took away their land and eliminated their ability to have their families continue the way they want to. So there's been a coercive process that took place, and that's what I want to interfere with. I mean, we have a situation, we have people who want to live a certain way. I respect that. I don't want anybody interfering with that. I don't want anybody making war on these people, taking away their land or whatever, or whatever scenario you can come up with. Coercive brainwashing of them, telling them, no, you don't want to be a standard human being. Whatever scenario you can come up with is a coercive scenario. So by definition, if they're not around 10,000 years from now and we weren't hit by an asteroid, somebody's done something really nasty to these folks, and I have issues with that. Well, what's the scenario you're picturing? Breed out? What do you mean breed out?
In other words, if there are some people who are genetically enhanced and some people who are not, and then there's breeding among populations, then
Oh, if it's voluntary, sure, that's fine. But I'm assuming that
the human nature that you object to is the coercion.
it is. It really is. Yeah. Well, I don't object to the evolutionary process. It's the coercion that bothers me.
I object to something even more than that. Is that fraudulent coercion? That is, we all know the story of how glorious it was to advertise tobacco in the 30s. If there was glory, sex, power, and so on. Now we realize that it was a way to brainwash people into gaining an addiction. And now we realize that, 50 years later, we realize that it was a bad thing, that it was hurting them. But one thing is coerce people and say, I force you at gunpoint to smoke a cigarette. One is try to convince them, to brainwash them into abandoning certain ways and taking up certain other ways, because it's in my interest to sell cigarettes to you, and I'm maintaining that it's in your interest. And I think that that tragedy of what may be happening is not so much the gunpoint coercion, but that subtle coercion that comes from diseducating people so that they will, churches as a special example, as Marvin was saying, in such a way that they will do your interests rather than theirs, and yet they're convinced that they're doing theirs.
I'm a little worried about there's sort of narrow and broad ideas when you say human nature. In fact, in this book that you can find 7 chapters on my webpage, each chapter starts out saying what distinguishes people from animals, and each one has a completely different answer and doesn't even refer to the others. But it seems to me that there are all these particular features of how humans behave that are biologically interesting or psychologically interesting. But when I think of human nature, I think of the fact that there are 4 or 5 kinds of animals that solve problems better than other animals. There's octopuses and cetaceans and other cephalopods and elephants and primates. It's hard to think of any, and those are the only animals around that have human nature. Mosquitoes don't solve hard problems. And I'm not saying, sometimes people come and say, well, look at termite, it builds these great things. But it doesn't figure out how to build them. It's just that's there. So I think you want to generalize human nature and say, why do we think we're so great besides, and so it seems to me that if we replace ourselves by creatures that can solve even harder problems, that's fine, and I don't, but that's a different meaning of human nature, less ad hoc maybe, or more ad hoc, depending.
It's not just solving problems that's valuable, surely.
Well, that's the question. It seems to me that otherwise we're just another animal. What's wrong with solving problems?
Okay, we have about time to go to lunch. We've used up the 10 minutes that were. I think that maybe the discussion came to a reasonably semicolon.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well.